letters, and we talked about it on the phone. But how you really feel about it, I don't really know.
What's your take on Cassavetes? 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 Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes?
Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, irresponsible opinions about classic film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave. We're here tonight to discuss Jennifer Jones once again. Acteurist Oeuvre-View. We're getting into the mid-1950s now, and we're going to be talking about Beat the Devil, a storied possible fiasco, at least in terms of the personal lives of the people involved in making it.
Well, also, it was not successful at the time of its release.
And then back to the safety of the studio for 20th Century Fox's and Henry King's Love is a Many-Splendored Thing.
One of the interesting things about Jennifer Jones's career is that it spans the late studio era and also the beginning of something new that filmmakers were trying to figure out. And so we have international co-productions.
A lot of globetrotting.
A lot of globetrotting even when they aren't international co-productions, like these two films.
Definitely shot on location. There's not much studio work here.
Well, apparently only some of the Hong Kong scenes in Love is a Many-Splendored Thing were shot on location.
Sure.
But that's more than usual. What is the reasoning for that? I've heard that shooting outside of Hollywood was sometimes less expensive.
In the late 40s and 50s, you get Hollywood trying to distinguish itself from the upstart TV, which did look very stage-bound, and they wanted to get out there and shoot the world as it is.
And you also see the use of CinemaScope.
Yeah, this is very early.
In Love
right?
is a Many-Splendored Thing.
1953, I think, is the first CinemaScope. The world is still getting used to and still marveling at super widescreen technology.
And we saw a letterboxed version.
It's the only way to watch these, because we actually get the right aspect ratio.
What is your prior knowledge of Beat the Devil? Your experience with the film?
I'd only seen it once before, actually, when I was a kid, and it was a video that I rented at my favorite place, Zazu Super Video, long gone now, in Pointe Claire, Quebec.
Did you know anything about it when you rented it? Had you read about it?
No, just whatever is written in the Leonard Maltin guide, which is not much, but I rented every single video from their classics section.
Was Maltin, what period? I guess this would have been the 80s, so it's already a cult film by the 80s. Was Maltin pro or con or?
I didn't revisit it. I don't remember him saying anything too special about it, and I don't recall what star rating it got. The version that I saw looked absolutely terrible, because it was in the public domain. So
yes,
the
this
video,
version that we saw, it looked very good.
There's been some work done to restore it. It does change things quite a bit. I remember it being kind of a disappointing experience. I liked it a lot more on
No,
this
actually,
viewing.
the cinematography is very beautiful, but then also the kind of grotesque close-ups and depth of field shots are very striking.
It's a pretty well-made movie, which that's not always its reputation.
I know.
It's kind of supposed to be just some slapdash thing that they palmed off on us as an excuse for a drinking binge.
What I heard about, I think I have watched it once before, but I have no recollection of it. What I heard about it in the mid-90s was that it was considered a cult classic, but the way it was talked about was even though the term didn't exist at the time, or wasn't in common usage, like a hipster film.
Yeah.
Like it was too unbelievably cool for its own good, even. And so I wasn't really in a sympathetic mindset toward it, despite the fact that Truman Capote was one of my favorite authors when I was a teenager, and I've read probably everything he's ever written.
It's kind of the template for the Rat Pack. It's several years before that kind of thing came together, Ocean's 11. It's really the first movie of of its kind. I can't think of anything else.
Of what kind? How would you describe its kind?
Very personal project executed by, in this case, and in most cases, usually, it's a star and a director who just want to go off and do their own thing, a hangout film. The only other things that are even close to it are all the John Wayne, John Ford co-productions, but those guys, whatever else they are the reverse of cool. And so you can never call them hipster. They're fucking square as hell. These are iconoclasts, out on a spree.
So, what I just read about it very briefly, in between watching and recording, contradicts some of that. There seem to be different stories in circulation about the film. The official story, or the story that, I don't know where it comes from, who told it out of the many people associated with the film. The familiar story is that this was based on a semi-spoof thriller novel by a British leftist journalist about colonial exploitation. And there was a script based on it, but Huston didn't like it. And so, at the last second, when they were about to shoot, he needed a new script. Selznick, getting his little fingers in the pie, as usual, anything his wife is involved in, suggested Truman Capote. Like I was saying to you off mic, Selznick really had his finger on the pulse, his little fingers, not only in every pie that Jennifer Jones was involved in, but also on the pulse of culture. He was really paying attention, and he had really good taste. And he was very cutting edge in the people he wanted to use, the directors, the writers. And then he just, by being a crazy Benzedrine addict, just managed to keep fucking it all up.
It's an interesting contradiction or corrective to the generally told story.
That he's middlebrow.
Ben Hecht quotation is that David Selznick was a voracious reader, except that he stopped when he was 12. So he idolized Dickens and all the people I idolized when I was 12.
Well, who knows if he personally read Truman Capote, but Capote's books were short, so it wouldn't have been hard, but he knew what was going on in film and culture. That's the important thing, and probably a more important thing for producers than how much did he read. Certainly read Gone with the Wind. There are other stories that...
But this was not a Selznick production. This is Bogart's company.
Production company, Romulus Films, and Santana Pictures. But there's no Wikipedia link to Santana Pictures. So we're at a loss.
Santana Pictures is definitely Bogart and maybe Huston.
I guess this was a international co-production. But the other producers were British.
And it was filmed in Italy.
So it was. A real mishmash. But as I was saying, other stories say that Capote's involvement has been exaggerated. But I don't know. And the story that circulates about the film is that Huston and Capote were at least completely rewriting it day by day, and that this was sort of in contradiction of your Rat Pack theory, that this was tremendously annoying to the performers, especially Bogart. But I have also heard the stories. I got this from Capote himself, reading a biography of Capote, Gerald Clark's. Yeah, everybody was drunk all the time, including Capote.
Sure, of course.
I hadn't realized, though, because of those stories about everybody being drunk all the time, I hadn't realized how early in Capote's career this was. This is why I'm saying that Selznick had his finger on the pulse, because this is very, very early in Capote's career. It's long before he even wrote Breakfast at Tiffany's, which was 1958. So he was a... short story writer. He mostly wrote novellas. Right. And he'd written a couple of novellas by this point. And he was a big sensation.
That Christmas story.
He wrote A Christmas Story, yeah. He wrote Other Voices, Other Rooms, and The Grass Harp by this point. So at this point, he's just a little, very feminine-looking pipsqueak. He's not the raging drug addict and alcoholic that he is sadly remembered as being in the 1960s. So somehow I'd gotten it mixed up in my mind. I was thinking that was the man who was on this set. Anyway, so everyone was drinking. All the men involved were drinking, despite the fact that, and as Capote, who is a bit of a fantasist, who likes to tell tales and embellish stories to make them better from his own life, but according to him, despite the extreme machoism of John Huston and Bogart and his own extreme flamboyant out there effeminacy, which was shockingly new to the culture at the time, even within the arts, they all got along like a house on fire.
Yeah, well, Huston and Bogart are both on the left in Hollywood. They were not communists, certainly on the cultural left.
I just mean he fit in with their boys' club somehow or other.
Yeah, because they're weirdo boys. They wouldn't fit in with John Ford and John Wayne.
I faintly recall a story Capote told of impressing Bogart by punching him in the jaw or something, but then I have to imagine tiny little, like 5'3" or something, girlish Truman Capote punching Bogart, who's like on the verge of death.
Yeah, he was not much bigger than that.
So I guess it's believable just for the fact that Bogart is visibly falling apart. The other story that one hears is that Jennifer Jones felt extremely alienated from this boys' club.
Yeah, and we have a lot of letters that she wrote to Selznick about how terrible this experience was.
So that's not pleasant either to think about that. However, somehow hearing that made me think that she was not going to fit in with the rest of the film.
No,
but
she
fits in perfectly.
She's the most important character, I think.
Really her only opportunity since Clooney Brown to play a comic role again.
Having a lot of fun on camera.
An absolute comic zany.
Yep.
Zanier than Clooney Brown by far. Made me think that she would have been, not that it's the same kind of role, but between her zaniness and her neurotic problems, that she would have been an excellent Holly Golightly.
Oh, yeah.
An excellent Holly Golightly. Of course, she was far too old to play the part. Holly's supposed to be like 20 or something in the novel. So.
Audrey Hepburn was far too old.
Exactly, right. But it's a missed opportunity. Apparently, Capote thought of the available options, the perfect Holly would have been Marilyn Monroe, but young Jennifer Jones would have been very good too. I enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too. Want to talk a little bit about the setting and the characters?
Well, if there was anything serious going on in it about colonial exploitation, that has been absolutely removed.
Okay, sure, but it does broach a topic that is absolutely essential to world politics right now, which is monstrous desecration of the African continent.
And the destruction of ways of life, horrifying stories coming out of there.
And all based on mineral extraction, which is what is going on right now. These countries are absolutely under the dictatorship of American and international companies, which need to maintain fascist control over the extraction process. And they have made corrupt deals with various governments. They exist to serve the needs of international corporations.
Here's something interesting. So the author of the novel that this was based on, he was a leading British Communist Party member.
Sure.
We're going to get this is two communist films. We're going to see one after the other.
Yeah.
However faintly related by the time they get onto the screen.
But they're certainly both notable for a more nuanced view of the international situation during the Cold War than you would normally get in movies from the mid-50s. I mean, this is while McCarthy is going mental.
Yes, absolutely. Like the way that both of these movies try to get around this. And of course, this would have an appeal. We saw We Were Strangers. That was our last Jennifer Jones Huston film. That subject would have had an appeal to John Huston, and maybe the fact that it seems relatively buried in the screenplay was his way of getting around the McCarthy era.
Yeah, it's quite apparent, but on the other hand, if you're just looking to go to the movies and see a goofball Hope and Crosby type movie, well, you could look at it that way too.
I don't recall Truman Capote being particularly political, although he was insanely intelligent. Do you want to set the stage then?
So Bogart and his wife, Gina Lollobrigida, he is one of his almost standard man with no country Americans who is, in this case, settled in Italy. He's got a fairly long track record of operating different businesses and owning different properties there, but he's fallen on hard times. He's made a deal with a quartet of creeps headed by Robert Morley.
This is also considered a self-parody of several other films of Huston's.
Yeah, I think so. He's not happy about it, but he's got no choice. This is the best he could arrange for himself and his wife to get back in the money. He is kind of a go-between between a low-level British administrator in East Africa, which is basically Kenya, probably. There is a piece of land that people don't know is laden with uranium. So there's going to be a land auction, and Bogart is going to facilitate the purchase of it by this quartet of criminals. The idea, presumably, is that they'll buy it, ostensibly to develop it for some kind of agricultural purpose, but then uranium will be discovered, and then they'll sell it back to the government at a massive profit.
This scam.
Britain is becoming a nuclear power in the mid-50s, so they will definitely want that uranium. He's kicking himself about it. He doesn't like it, and we don't know the backstory. We just know that he is no longer the owner of the different things that he used to own, so something went really wrong. This is what he's reduced to. This international gang of criminals.
They are set up with the flashback structure. They're set up as a joke from the beginning.
They've been arrested. We know that's how the story ends. They're being paraded down the street, and they're very unprepossessing criminals, even more feeble-looking than the criminals in Maltese Falcon. You got Robert Morley, pot-bellied, middle-aged British guy. You've got Peter Lorre looking decidedly decrepit at this point in the mid-50s.
Robert Morley, I guess, is sort of this, and he gets called fat in many different ways, many different times. But I guess he's sort of the Sidney Greenstreet stand-in, but less impressive. Like, way less impressive.
Yeah, he's a very good actor, though.
Oh, no,
but
he was wonderful, but he gets increasingly pathetic throughout the course of the film.
No, he doesn't have the mastery of scenes that Caspar Gutman has, that's for sure. The scenes are written differently, so he doesn't have that kind of control. Then there is the Major, who's this diminutive little fucking fascist, who actually talks
it's so true.
whenever he's given a
so
chance.
Hilarious.
About how the
Hitler, Mussolini, those are real men.
Yeah, this generation lost its chance when those guys died. So he's got hopes for the future, a new kind of white supremacist future that could dawn someday.
This doesn't sound funny, except that Capote and Huston are not writing a normal script. These characters just start bursting out with absurd speechifying at a moment's notice.
Yeah, and they tell you all about themselves. And because of the person saying it, obviously, this is not someone to be taken seriously. This is someone to be abhorred. The last member of the gang is played by Marco Tulli, who's a kind of skeletal Italian actor who I feel like I've seen in something before, but I don't know what. They are all very disreputable and not exactly all that dangerous seeming, although when Jennifer Jones spots them and talks about them with her husband early on, she does describe them as international criminal types.
So Jennifer Jones, sort of idiot savant.
Chess master.
Some kind of a genius, but she also is a complete screwball and a constant fantasist. I think she's probably the closest thing to Capote's self-portrait in the film.
Yeah, she makes up stories about herself and about everyone she meets. It just keeps her mind occupied. Her husband is a kind of stiff upper lip Britisher who comes off as at least a minor aristocrat. Turns out he's not even a member of the gentry, but he has inherited a coffee plantation in British East Africa, so they're going there as well.
She instantly decides that she is in love with Humphrey Bogart, and that starts a very strange sort of
wife-swapping
scenario that never actually leads to any sex, but definitely it does seem as though Bogart and Lollobrigida have
an open
marriage, yes.
Yeah,
Talk about it completely openly. I don't know how
Gina Lollobrigida.
Yeah, so I don't know how they got all that past the censor, but
it's an internationally produced film.
Yeah,
I don't really know if it was shown all that much in the United States, was it?
Weren't you saying that the British censors were worse at this point?
In the 30s and 40s they were. I have no idea what they were like by the 50s. So she takes two separate interests. First, she's interested in the international criminals because she finds them romantic personages for some reason. And then, even more improbably, Bogart becomes the object of her imagination and affection. She strikes up an acquaintance with him, and he finds her interesting as well. They become involved. Lollobrigida has always had a fetish for the English lifestyle, high tea, and all these sorts of things. So she is happy to spend some time with the abandoned husband. And they're all stalled in a town in southern Italy waiting for this ship to get underway that's going to take them to North Africa and eventually get them to East Africa where they need to go.
So Jennifer Jones does seem like she's acting in a different movie than anybody else, but luckily that is what her character is doing. It's a quality that she exhibited more frequently in her early movies that I find quite fascinating, particularly in Love Letters.
I think it really serves the film quite well because she is an outsider to all of this and she's trying to impose her own ideas onto a preset narrative, a totally different kind of narrative, and it all works quite well. We get a lot of narrative developments out of this waiting that they have to do. They're stranded there.
After some of the location shooting in Italy, and some driving around in Italy, and things looking very pretty and scenic, once they get onto the ship, then it just becomes this sort of chamber drama for a long...
There's some tension generated, again, by Jones's flights of fancy. She is taken with Bogart and she wants to inflate her own position in the world. She tells him that their coffee plantation is also loaded with uranium. Bogart knows enough to know that this isn't true, but Peter Lorre overhears it and goes back to the gang leader and tells him, oh, Bogart's holding out on you. He's making a separate deal with these other uranium people.
Peter Lorre is just running around tailing Bogart because they don't trust him fully. Because he's an outside operator.
He's not a member of their gang. He's a typical Bogart character, half good, half bad, or whatever. They're thoroughly bad. Peter Lorre, he never quite comes out and says it, right? But he says he goes by the name O'Hara now. There are lots of Germans in Chile going by Irish names, and that means he's an escaped Nazi.
Okay.
I don't know if you picked up on that.
I wondered about it, but I did not pick up on it.
He is a Nazi.
How could he possibly disguise his Germanness simply by changing his surname to O'Hara? Who would that fool?
As long as there's no paper trail of him being whatever he used to be when he was in the SS.
So this movie is absolutely stuffed with that sort of thing. I don't know, probably it's time for a new take on this film. After it was rescued as a cult classic, people recognizing its weird offbeat style and humor. Beginning in the 60s, I believe, there was a turnaround on it. It should probably be reviewed again because it's a very political film, as you would expect from Huston. I mean, I started this podcast off saying it's not, and it's true that those elements could have been played up a lot more. They're just kind of sneaked in there.
Yeah, very effectively. And again, still a very live issue. Africa is being strip mined at this moment, not for the benefit of anyone that lives there.
Not just that, but as I was saying, all of this various references to fascism.
Yeah, it's still being strip mined by fascists right now.
So she has told him this. It's just coincidental. She doesn't know anything about uranium plans, so it's just coincidental that she mentions this.
Yeah, and again, Bogart knows it's just hot air. He just doesn't think anything of it, and it wouldn't have come to anything if they hadn't been spied on that way.
And so then there's a hilarious scene with the car.
But that's all set in motion by this lie Jones tells. Because the gang doesn't trust Bogart anymore. They think that he's gonna skip out on the deal, make a separate peace with these coffee plantation people. So Robert Morley says, that's it. We're going to Kenya right now by plane. We're not waiting for this boat. The first officer keeps coming by, or first mate keeps coming by and says, sorry, no ship today. Captain's too drunk. That guy's amazing, actually, that actor. Has this bemused attitude towards seaworthiness of his vessel all the time. He keeps saying, we'll depart anytime between one day and a fortnight. So Bogart and Morley are broken off from the main group. They're being chauffeured to the plane that is going to take them off to Africa. But the car develops difficulties. They have to push it. Yeah, it becomes a real comedy set piece. And eventually they push it so effectively that it goes right on its own down the highway and over the cliff.
Yeah, and nearly runs into a bus full of passengers.
A bus full of people with their arms waving out like the Mulholland Drive kids doing the drag race or something. This leads to the rumor that Bogart and Morley are dead.
Yes. So Jennifer Jones has comedy hysterics over this.
Yeah, and the gang further fractures because at this point, the Italian member of the gang tells Jones's husband about what they were trying to do, their scheme, because they need someone else to invest in it.
This isn't the big sleep. Despite this film's reputation, it's not that hard to follow the plot.
No, not at all.
It's a relatively simple plot, and it just means the criminals are very stupid.
Yeah, they're incompetent. One thing that I do like is that it shows that you can be an incompetent crook and still get ahead in this world most of the time, because everything is set up to facilitate it.
Well, not these guys, though, because they came across this crazy British couple.
The end of the story is that the crazy British couple become the crooks instead. Yeah. This stiff upper lip guy, after talking so patriotically, he decides to go buy this plot of land, and then he will reap the rewards and sell it back to the government, and then he will become a country squire like he's always wanted.
It's not a very satisfying Marxist ending.
Perfect, because it doesn't show heroics of any kind. It shows fraud as business as usual.
There's a whole long passage on the ship.
We got Jennifer Jones doing her calisthenics.
She's just a nut. She's an absolute nut bar.
She does look pretty good. She gets to show off her legs.
How old is she by this time?
Mid-30s.
Mid-30s still?
She and Lola Brigida, they never have any kind of animosity between them, which I liked.
Sure.
Even though they're swapping men, or presumably there's some sort of situation going on where each has each other's husbands. In a lot of other movies, there would be harsh words between these women, but no, they're on good terms, totally.
Lola Brigida has a very sophisticated version of marriage, and so she's not bothered by any kind of jealousy.
The other thing is that it seems like maybe her interest in the husband is more of a put-on than anything else, by the end anyway, because she does sort of try a femme fatale act on him to get him to stop doing the stupid things he's doing that are going to get him killed, and when he rejects her, she's like, okay, you're stupid, fuck off.
Well, he is stupid.
He's awful.
He's pretty useless. She seemed to have a small interest in him, curiosity about him at the beginning, but...
Yeah, but she doesn't really want to leave her husband for this guy.
Well, not leave.
No.
But obviously she's had affairs in the past, but we don't really get that here, a sense that that's what she wants.
Jones really does want to leave her husband and run off with Bogart. She does.
I don't know about that.
Well, she says, let's run off together.
She might have done it.
Yeah.
But I don't know if she has a level of reality underneath all of her fantasies, because as soon as this is the big twist, as soon as the husband tries to escape the people plotting his murder by jumping overboard after coming out with a lot of British nationalist nonsense while he's on the ship, she switches around and can't stand Bogart anymore and just keeps pining after her lost husband. I don't think that is a level of reality either. I think she's just a total fantasist.
I think she is tired of her husband for most of this movie.
He is very boring.
She does care for him, and she says even he is one of the best examples of his type. She's just tired of him. But no, she doesn't want anything bad to happen to him, and she is happy to hear that he's not dead. I think that's all pretty consistent.
I think that's all true, but what I'm saying is I don't think she has a level of reality which is, I love this man, I love that man.
Ah, I see.
It's just whatever is catching her whim. She's named Gwendolyn. Reviews have noted that she's a lot like the other heroine in The Importance of Being Earnest, Cecily, who is constantly making up stories of things that didn't happen to her in her diary. You don't know that very well.
No, not at all.
You don't know Importance of Being Earnest.
I mean, I've seen it as a film. I don't remember
One of my favorite works of literature.
Well, do we want to zero in on any particular scenes? The ship does develop a serious terminal problem and is going to sink at a certain point before they get anywhere near their destination. They have to row ashore in a small boat, and they land on the Mediterranean coast of North Africa. That's not where they want to go. Maybe Algeria? I don't know. And it turns out that Robert Morley and his gang, in their previous existence, have been international arms dealers, and they sold defective weaponry to Arab resistance fighters and are personae non grata in North Africa. So they are trying to hide their identities because they are wanted men there for screwing up several national liberation efforts. So we get a lot of comedy out of interrogations where Morley and his gang don't want to be known for who they are. They're trying to pretend to be anything other than what they are. They say that they're vacuum cleaner salesmen on their way to Central Africa.
Which, they're just very, very terrible at fooling anybody about anything.
And the effect there is that the international system being what it is, even inept fucks like this have been able to make successful livings as criminals for decades. And here they finally run out of luck. But they should never have managed to succeed in any of their schemes.
So this, what would you call him? Commander? Officer? Leader?
He seems more like the local prefect of police or something, right?
Oh, okay.
Like a Claude Rains, someone who is part of the local constabulary. His name is Ahmed.
Yes, I believe so.
He's played by a Spanish actor.
He fancies himself an intellectual.
And a Rita Hayworth fan.
He and Bogart meet back in his office after, for what reason does Bogart decide to just suddenly run away?
Well, no, I like that, because Bogart wants to get away from this gang of thieves that he's falling in with.
So this is a wily plan. He's the only person with any brains in this movie.
Yeah, he stages a doomed escape. I mean, he just runs out of the police office.
And he gets the shit beat out of him, as we see afterwards.
Yeah. But all of it is to get away from the gang so that he can have a separate conversation with the police officer, and they make a deal where he's going to bring in the police officer as a partner, and he's also going to introduce him to Rita Hayworth. Now that makes the police officer seem like a complete idiot, but...
And this is a joke about Rita Hayworth's recent marriage.
To the Ali Khan?
Yeah, there's a specific reference to her enjoying the company of darkly handsome men. Also tremendously eccentric.
I really like Peter Lorre's scenes.
Apparently, the story goes that he was one of the actors who were allowed to improvise a lot of their dialogue.
Yeah, well, that scene where he comes to Bogart and explains his philosophy it's pretty amazing.
Huston just cuts away from it at a certain point. Like he's gone on for hours and hours more, but which we don't get to see.
No.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of action in the film or anything. There's one scene where the Major attempts to kill Jennifer Jones's husband and is thwarted in that effort. The final scene all comes out of that. These guys are going to get away with it again. They're captured or they're caught up with by an international agent of Scotland Yard because he's investigating the murder of a British politician who was someone who made a corrupt deal with them. But then Morley's gang were afraid he might renege on it, so they just killed him. And Bogart knows this from the beginning and knows that he's in with a thoroughly bad lot, worse than he anticipated. And he wants to get out at the beginning, but Lola Brigida says, let's just go through with this. We need money. Jennifer Jones, she's got her Sam Spade moment at the end. She may not be completely head over heels with her husband or whatever, but there's a principle of this thing. The Major did try to kill her husband and has killed a British politician in the past, and she just turns them in. And that's the only reason they get caught, is because she decides that it's time to put an end to their ridiculous smear of international capers.
But Bogart is not implicated in this.
No, he isn't. He wasn't involved in the murder.
True.
So that's why he's not being paraded down the street in the scene that opens the film.
And the suggestion of the husband's letter at the end, where he's talking about whatever the hell a chilled liver is again, is that he's very happy for Bogart and his wife and Bogart's wife all to join him in his new scheme.
Well, I'm not sure about that, actually. I think he's...
Well, that's the wording of the letter.
No, that's written to his wife.
Oh, just his wife alone?
Yeah. He's not going to share the profits with Bogart. But Bogart reads it.
Oh, well, that's still fairly generous under the circumstances.
This is the end, Bogart says. It's the end. And it is the end. But yeah, she presumably is going to go back to him and keep on with her craziness.
And the British will start exploiting Africa.
Well, they've been exploiting Africa for hundreds of years, but now they're going to do it for minerals.
Sure. And it will be even worse than before.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about Huston's films. They're not generally... I'm prejudiced against them. They don't seem like the kind of thing I would enjoy very much. I know In This Our Life very well. Very leftist film. Anti-racism film. Made in the 1940s with Betty Davis. I know it because it's a Betty Davis film, although it's actually not very interesting for her, but it is a very interesting film for its politics. I know We Were Strangers because of Jennifer Jones, and of course I know The Maltese Falcon. Probably saw The African Queen at some point, but I don't have a lot of knowledge about how this fits into his tour profile.
Fits perfectly with
But this movie makes me like him a lot more than I ever have before.
He's got a lot of movies about thieves falling out and there being no justice anyway.
The mixture of humor, eccentricity, and cynicism about the international picture. It's very likable.
Treasure of the Sierra Madre, probably one of his most universally loved films for its unflinching view of human depravity. He's always got humor sprinkled in. Sure. Asphalt Jungle is one of my favorites of his movies.
Well, yes, I've seen that, but I don't know it well.
But again, it's a caper movie with a very misanthropic worldview, but funny as well.
I saw in one of the reviews I read, in reading up about the movie, it was compared in the misunderstanding that greeted it, as well as in its combination of offbeat humor and a cynical look at the international picture. It was compared to Elaine May's Ishtar.
Yeah.
I think this is I can safely say I love Elaine May's comedy writing in her movies as well, but for me, anyway, this was a better, sharper, and funnier film. But it is very Elaine May-ish in its comedy, in that kind of wacky offbeat humor. Who knows who was bringing it? Because Truman Capote doesn't really write. None of his novels are like that.
No. No, I think this is more Huston's sensibility. Maybe he's bringing Capote in for some of the music of the language.
Yeah, exactly. The literary speech-making.
Huston, for sure. And the Major is the key figure. He unifies all of it. He was in the Indian Army. He mentions that.
Yeah.
That's the army he was the Major in. So colonial occupation force. He is pro-Hitler, pro-Mussolini, and he gives several speeches whenever he gets a chance about how you have to deal with native populations. He lectures Robert Morley for not being more commanding and overbearing with the people that have them in their clutches. He's shown to be an out-and-out white supremacist at all times, and also, just because of the context, he's quite ineffectual. It gets to have its cake and eat it, too. It shows the monstrous white supremacy behind the world order of the time, but also gets to belittle these people because they happen to be in disadvantaged position in this film.
It's a well-made film, well-plotted film, well-made satire.
With a great heroine at its center, played by our friend Jennifer Jones.
Let's chalk up another great Jennifer Jones film.
Yeah, it may not have been great for her personally to film, but you don't notice it. She seems to be having a great time on screen.
Sure, absolutely. Applies to stories about the production of Love is a Many-Splendored Thing as well. She was an intensely serious actress and was kind of probably, which was not common at the time, but probably a kind of a method actress. Like, partly intuitively, and as we now know, she was also continuing her acting education. As we mentioned, that was in our discussion of I Walk with a Zombie, in our movie-going section. I don't even know what episode that was. But anyway, we talked about her attending Catherine Dunham's dance and theater school in the 1940s.
Yes.
So I'm sure she was very absorbed in her role and gave it her professional all. So are you a fan of the Treasure of Sierra Madre?
Treasure of Sierra Madre? Yeah, I like it. It's not one of my favorite.
Did you like this better?
I think I probably do like it better. Treasure of the Sierra Madre is more perfect an example of what it is. I mean, it may be the most perfect misanthropic statement about human fortune seeking. That's not exactly what I want to see in a movie all the time, but a great movie.
But does it have political interest like this one does?
Of course. It's based on a book by B. Traven, the mysterious B. Traven, who was a Marxist who had to run away from the United States at a certain point and lived in Mexico.
I guess I'm getting definitely more interested in Huston's work now.
Good.
I suppose the fact that I understand politics very slightly more than not at all now will be helpful with that.
Huston, he wrote a lot of the script for Juarez, which is one of my favorite of the Warner biopics, a very strange off-the-beaten-path effort there. He also wrote the screenplay for High Sierra, and he wrote the screenplay for Three Strangers. So these are incredible movies that he didn't direct. His directorial career, it's hit and miss. He made a lot of movies, and some of them I don't find all that interesting. Some of them are kind of misfires. I don't know if they're even really his fault. I don't know if there could have been a great adaptation of Moby Dick, but certainly his is not. I don't know if I really want to blame him for that. It's kind of fun that he even tried, and he did give that.
Who the hell could possibly? It would have to be a 20-hour art film of people standing around. It doesn't even make sense for them to make those speeches in the novel. It would have to be a complete and utter original feat of filmmaking. It would have to originate its own technique as a film.
In May, we're going to be talking about Melville adaptations. And I guess we'll have to see what we want to say about Paula X and Beau Travail. But I do, tipping my hand, I do feel like Paula X is a pretty amazing film adaptation of Pierre, which is my favorite of his novels.
Yeah, but it does sort of originate its own style and technique.
Yeah, and Huston doesn't. The one great thing about it, which I think everyone agrees on, is Orson Welles as Father Mapple taking center stage at the beginning and giving his insane preachments. That is really well done. But Huston made a lot of really good movies. Was a very good actor as well. Certainly you appreciate him in Chinatown, don't you?
That's John Huston?
Yeah, Noah Cross. Mr. Geddes.
I always get confused between John and Walter as
Walter
actors.
was long dead by 1972.
Long dead. What do I know Walter Huston from, though?
Lots of things. Probably Dodsworth, Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Well, you haven't seen that. Rain. I mean, Walter Huston.
Oh, yeah, Rain with Joan Crawford?
Brilliant actor. I'm sure we'll talk about many John Hustons in the future. He was working for Warner Brothers for quite a while. He'll definitely come up in those, and maybe a special subject one day. Who knows?
It's interesting talking about Huston the way you've been speaking of him as writer, filmmaker, auteur, and talking about his appearance in Chinatown, because that is the ultimate comment, that movie, on both human corruption and absolutely despairing and misanthropic worldview in which power is thoroughly evil and cannot be displaced.
Chinatown fits right in with Huston's own oeuvre, with, of course, the addition of Polanski peculiarities like extensive incestual rape. I don't think that Huston really explored that aspect, but well, everything else fits right in.
That was apparently Polanski's metaphor for despair over human life in art as it was in life. Just can't stop.
Onward to Love is a Many-Splendored Thing. As we mentioned, this was a 20th Century Fox film, and it was directed by Henry King, one of the greats.
True, and this is his second film with Jennifer Jones.
He did Song of Bernadette in the 40s. Later on, he will also do Tender as the Night.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to that, as I keep saying, because I read the novel recently in preparation, so.
He had a huge career, and he lived until 1982.
So this was a visually fascinating movie. No close-ups at all. It's like he used CinemaScope to create all of these painterly compositions. Barely even any medium shot. Like, every shot is a panorama.
Yeah, and that was a style that they were evolving to take the most advantage of the new CinemaScope techniques.
But even indoor shots that aren't visually spectacular, there are no close-ups. It's very consistent and very unusual.
Yeah, King did a lot of CinemaScope productions. Beloved Infidel. That's a movie that I think deserves a reassessment. I've always really liked it. It's Gregory Peck playing F. Scott Fitzgerald, which seems a bit weird, but it is quite an interesting and intense movie. It's about his last days and his love affair with Sheila Graham, played by Deborah Carr. Very, very interesting movie, late in Henry King's career, 1959, but a couple of years before he would conclude his career with Tender as the Night.
Love is a Many-Splendored Thing, based on the autobiographical novel by Han Suyin.
Yeah. So you just read about her. What do you have to say about her?
Well, as I said, there's another sort of communist background to this movie, which does come out subtly.
Yeah.
In the subtext of the film, and in some cases in the text.
Way more interestingly than I ever thought possible for a big studio release at this time.
You've seen this before, though.
Oh yeah, I have it on DVD.
The author was, in fact, a physician as well as a novelist.
Yeah.
And she wrote a lot of memoirs and autobiographical works, and became very famous. But she also became notorious because during the 60s, she incessantly defended the Cultural Revolution. And
Cool.
She traveled to China and was sound with the Chinese government. The Guardian article I read about her, an obituary in the book section, she died in 2012 at the age of 95, says that she later recanted her support for the Cultural Revolution, but then I read the whole article and I couldn't find anywhere where she's recanted anything. It seems that she was, of course, rightly critical of the government in many ways at many times, but it doesn't sound like there was any kind of wholesale recanting. Not that I could make out from this article anyway. Obviously, the article itself is not very sympathetic to Mao Zedong.
No, you wouldn't expect the Guardian to be delivering a really balanced appraisal.
On a good day, they like Bernie Sanders. I mean, this is her story.
The movie's 1955. Presumably the book was written
52.
A year or two earlier.
52.
Okay. So her story had many, many years to go. It was very early on in her story, but this is a tale of her life as a young doctor and...
A young Eurasian doctor.
I don't know if Eurasian is a word that gets used anymore,
well,
but it's certainly
uses it,
used...
so we're going to use it.
Yeah, it's continuously used in this film.
It's used, in fact, as a term of self-identification that she embraces.
Yeah.
She insists on it. She's not Chinese. She insists on that. She's Chinese in a cultural way, yes. Obviously, these are very confusing and confused issues, and the story does not shy away from that fact.
The most important thing to note before we go any further, obviously, is to say that Jennifer Jones may not have been the right casting in a fair world.
And she doesn't look a damned thing like Han Suyin.
That's a huge thing, and we're not going to excuse it. That's a terrible thing about Hollywood in the 50s, is that they almost never cast anyone who wasn't white as a star, even when there was absolutely every reason not to cast a white person in that role. But if you put that aside, the racial politics of the film are actually not as terrible as you might expect them to be.
And also they don't really do makeup for her. I think the eyeliner on both her and the other woman who's supposed to be Eurasian, just drawn slightly longer than it would normally be for European actresses or American actresses. Other than that, there's been no change to her appearance, which is better.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, there are magnificent performances in full makeup, like Nils Astor in Bitter Tea of General Yen.
Swedish star who played a Chinese general.
That's possibly even more problematic than this is. We're supposed to be talking about Jennifer Jones's persona in this series, and it seems relevant how often she was cast as not fully white.
Yeah, that's true.
It is an aspect of her character that she read to, I guess, audiences, certainly to people casting her, read as quote-unquote exotic in a way that could be, as it was from a white Anglo-American perspective, it could morph into anything from Welsh gypsy to Asian to Native American.
Yeah, it's true. She was the Myrna Loy of her time.
Many actresses have done racially appropriative roles, including Katharine Hepburn.
Yes, the immortal dragon seed.
But anybody, basically any actress with dark hair, all the way from, as you say, Myrna Loy, Sylvia Sidney, Loretta Young, all the way to Ava Gardner in Showboat in the 1950s.
It was interesting, though, actually, this particular pairing, because we didn't mention in Beat the Devil, she's a blonde out of nowhere.
It's true.
Actually looks more like herself in Love is a Many-Splendored Thing.
What's interesting about Jones's career, if you're looking at it from a perspective where it's not just completely horrible, is how many different races she portrayed.
Well, that's just a reflection of the general racism, which paints anyone who is not white as basically the same, just other.
Yeah, like
so
I was saying.
Anyone can play anyone.
Yeah, as long as they themselves have a touch of something exotic about them. It's all the same to the Anglo-American imagination.
We pick up her story. She is a successful doctor. She is working in Hong Kong at a hospital, and we get a little glimpse of her day-to-day life there. She is very well respected by her colleagues, and they think that she's been working too hard. She's got to relax a little. Mm-hmm. That's the impetus for the whole story, because one of her fellow doctors talks her into taking a little time off to going to a party so she can restore her balance and sense of humor.
Isn't that the white doctor who he's the only one who keeps encouraging this romance?
Yeah, he's not negative about it.
In the scene with the fish, he's encouraging it again. He doesn't want her to become one of the fish who go down to the bottom where it's dark.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that he's encouraging this particular romance, but he doesn't want her to give up on her emotional life, which is what she says she's done. She's a widow. Her husband was a nationalist general and was killed in the Civil War.
All true. This all happened.
Yeah, and so she says that's it for her. She is now wedded to medicine, and that's all she needs. But she goes to this party, and here we get a sense of more of the power structure, the economic power structure of Hong Kong at this time. It's set in 1949.
So yes, the novel was considered to be a satirical portrait of, hey, once again, British imperialism or British colonialism.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of a familiar portrait of the kinds of Europeans that lived parasitically on different parts of the world. People kind of like this in Bitter Tea of General Yen, too.
But here we get a kind of a proto-communist portrait of what happens to women when they are completely useless in their society. This society matron is the representative of the most repulsive aspects.
Well, she and her husband.
No, but she gets all of the screen time. And she's actually called useless at one point. I think Jennifer Jones calls her useless.
She is very useless. But her husband is also useless, but he's got power, which is even worse. He's in charge of the board of the hospital.
Right.
And he's kind of absent most of the time, but but he is a very important figure, actually, in terms of how the narrative developed. Jennifer Jones is being introduced around. Kind of interesting, since she is a novelist, that the hostess mistakes her for a great artist instead of a great...
I knew I'd heard something wonderful about you.
Yeah, so she's both, it turns out. But in the movie, she's just a doctor right now.
Yeah, it seems that writing these autobiographical and political novels eventually overtook her career in medicine.
Did impressive stuff in both fields, it seems.
Here, it's actually not implausible that you have a movie star portraying a real person, because I looked at photos of Han Suyin, and she was, as a young woman, very glamorous and very beautiful. So she had a stylish sense of herself, so she would have been this extraordinarily hot, well-dressed young doctor.
So when she shows up at a party, people would take notice. People
Absolutely.
Like dashing international correspondent William Holden.
Wonder if he really looked like that.
And William Holden, this is his decade, the 50s. I mean, he starts really, really young. We actually covered a movie that he was in 1940 as a teenager, Our Town. So he was a rising star as like a 20-year-old, and then he kind of flounders around during the 40s a little bit, but he has his definitive kind of second start and real takeoff for the mature epoch of his career with Sunset Boulevard. And then it's just great movie to great movie for like 10 years, all through the 50s. I think he's great in this movie, too.
Yeah.
I think
he works really well. They have a very easy, believable chemistry. At first, he seems like he's going to be a real American macho jerk, and he certainly does some exoticizing of her.
Oh, yeah.
Wishing that she would always have her Chinese garb on. She talks about how there's a stereotype of easy Eurasian women, which you see this stereotype portrayed, and luckily by a lot of elements in the film subverted in The Sun, right? The idea that any woman of mixed race somehow represents abundant or easy sexuality.
Yeah, well, it's in her dialogue, in the text, that as soon as people think about this, it becomes synonymous with some kind of sense of illicit sexuality, and that is imputed to the product of a union.
Insane.
Well, it's all insane.
Interestingly, another interesting thing about watching these two movies together is that it shows Jones's range.
Oh, yeah.
So she's being just an absolute kook, as we said, in Beat the Devil, and doing a lot of her earlier mannerisms, the great big eyes and the larger-than-life expressions that she does, right? Here, I'm thinking about this in terms of the portrayal of the character's sexuality and relationship to it. Again, as we saw her do in We Were Strangers, when she's playing a Cuban woman, goes for very, very reserved. Now, again, the exception to this is Jewel in the Sun, but obviously Vidor and Selznick wanted something very specific from her there. But here I feel like this portrayal is, in those two instances, it seems like something that would have been at least in part the actress's choice.
Yeah, well, she's a very deep-thinking character, introspective. She's not going to make any foolhardy leaps here. She's going to really think things through, and the audience goes through it with her. Despite the fact, as you said, that there aren't any close-ups, you do feel close to her throughout the movie.
It's incredible that Jennifer Jones could do Ruby Gentry and have that sort of relationship to sexuality and then also do this. This is a lot more actually like, I was thinking of the woman's picture tropes in this, because we just saw Now Voyager.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a little bit like that, because Now Voyager is very much it's an art film, like I said, and it's very much ahead of its time in its introspective look at women's sexuality from a psychiatric and Freudian point of view. It really gives credence to the idea that sexual repression isn't healthy, but that sexual sublimation might be, and they're not the same thing, right? Because Jones's character does go through this blossoming and transformation as she falls in love. Most absolutely, I mean, there's a lot of amazing nature photography in this film, almost as amazing as Gone to Earth. The most ravishing images of her are midway through the film, their love scenes meeting at that tree on the mountain behind the hospital. This is a glorious Technicolor film where she's lying in the grass, rolling around erotically in the grass, not in the over-the-top way often associated with her performances.
No, it's a very transcendentalized.
Just like Beat the Devil, but in a completely different way. It's a ideal Jones persona role. Her character is superstitious, interested in traditional Chinese religion and folklore religion.
It's a stand-in for faith and hope of any kind, really.
Yeah, but
it's invested with meaning because of her association of it with her childhood and her family's.
But when she was making the prayer scroll,
yeah,
or I'm not sure if it was called a scroll, but the artwork with the prayer on it, I was thinking of the witchcraft so-called associations in
Gone to Earth.
And she does, here's a Jennifer Jones moment. We haven't been very consistent in finding our Jennifer Jones moments, but in Beat the Devil, among the many crazy things Gwendolyn says, she does tell Bogart that she is a witch and that she learned witchcraft from her Spanish nurse.
Yes, she does. Maybe I can help your scheme with my spells.
So, and there is this, and maybe, it's Henry King again from Song of Bernadette. There is this sense, a kind of animistic sense of nature and the splendor of nature and larger-than-life emotion taking place within this context.
Yeah, there's a real blossoming here. She likes this guy right away, but she is not sold on the seriousness of his intentions and why would she? Because his first dialogue to her explains that he was supposed to look her up a couple of weeks ago, but because he heard she was a doctor, he thought she would just be a nerd.
She is quite a nerd, though.
Yeah, but a beautiful nerd, and that changes everything for Holden. But quickly he makes up for that by actually listening to her and showing us quite clearly that he is just as taken with her as a person, and not only because she looks like Jennifer Jones.
And to her commitment to her work.
Well, this becomes really essential. What he says is that she's actually able to do something really constructive in this world. All he can do is witness
because he's
things that are going on.
A journalist and sometimes a war correspondent.
Well, I guess he's always primarily a war correspondent as long as there's a war going on in the sector of the world that he's supposed to be covering.
Right.
So the Chinese Civil War has just come to an end. That's why he's kind of sitting around Hong Kong for a moment or two and actually has time to meet Jennifer Jones. But later on in the film, the Korean conflict will get started, and that will pull him away from her again. But yeah, this is like a little charmed interval. The context for all of this, and our audience probably knows, but just in case, Hong Kong is not involved in all of this. It belongs to the British up until 1999.
And that definitely seems to suck, but it's sucking in its own way.
But it is insulated from the Civil War in China. The different factions do lay off Hong Kong. They don't get involved there. The war is over in 1949, and the nationalists, Jones's husband among them, although he's dead, they run away to Taiwan. That's the end of that conflict. They're beaten. Macau, which turns out that's also in the same situation as Hong Kong. It's a Portuguese colony, so you might have noticed that there's Portuguese speaking going on in the background there, and Portuguese words, and that also reverted to mainland China in 1999. So we only see one major part of the film that actually takes place in China, and that's when she goes to visit her family.
Right.
But I guess we can get to that a little later. We still have some scene setting to do. A lot of the early part of the film is slowly getting to know each other and getting to understand that they are both serious people. We learn that he's married, but it turns out that he's in one of these melodrama marriages that has been dead for many, many years. He hasn't even seen her, but she won't let go of him. And it's not just in movies, obviously. This is something that was legally possible at the time and did happen. If one spouse really wanted to ruin the life of the other spouse, they could do it.
I don't know when irreconcilable differences was passed into law.
And, it depends on the country.
Yeah. Or where they got married or anything else.
For the purposes of this film, Holden's marriage took place under a set of laws that do not permit divorce unless both parties want it.
Or one party can prove the other has committed some kind of crime like adultery.
Right, yeah. So
cruelty, adultery, etc.
His wife, no, she's just holed up in Singapore, hating him and refusing to divorce him and refusing to give him any grounds for a unilateral divorce as well. We never see her. We never get any sense of who this person is. We just have to imagine from other movies that she's a jerk. Right? Jones has friends who know her, and that's what they describe her as.
Yeah,
but
like,
again...
It's like now Voyager again.
We never get her side of the... Well, no, now Voyager is a little different because...
Well, I mean, in the broad outline.
Yeah. Jerry's wife is mentally ill as well. Like, there's some kind of...
She's a hypochondriac. Nobody is sympathetic enough to call her mentally ill.
I guess.
The daughter has become ill.
Right. This character that is alluded to doesn't even get that much. She's just evil. She's just doing it for the sake of torturing everyone.
But anyway, it makes a good setup for their impossible romance. So there's a lot of unbelievable, hard to credit scenes of these two slightly long in the tooth, but very good looking actors in their swimming costumes on the beach, not touching each other. It's interesting how much sexual tension is aroused for the viewer, I guess, and I guess between the two of them as well. But it's a long time before this relationship becomes remotely physical, and that's really not emphasized that much.
There's some kissing.
There's some kissing. Transformation of her feelings is the main aspect of it.
Yeah, they really develop an intimacy that is believably portrayed, I think.
They are always meeting at this tree. They have a lot of discussions about life and love there.
It's a Many-Splendored Thing.
My favorite Jonesy moment from this film didn't take place by the tree. I think it's when they go to Macau. I'm not sure. It's in a hotel room where she starts telling him about how everything her whole relationship to the world has changed. She starts talking about she can see colors more intensely, and she pays attention to textures, and...
Pretty great. It's sort of like the Queen Christina scene. Greta Garbo talks about how she's memorizing every sensuous detail of the room that she's in with Gilbert, and in this, it's more like a summation of how this is going on all the time, whether she's in a room with Holden or not anymore. It's just sort of put her senses on hyperdrive.
And I don't know why that seems so Jonesy to me, but it did seem to work for, I guess, the intensity and passion with which her characters relate to the world.
Yeah, it does, for sure. I think a really great little scene where she meets up in a cafe with someone that she studied with at a convent as a child.
Right.
Suzanne, who is now passing for European. She's dyed her hair blonde, and she says, it's true, the way this society is set up, most of the time people from our background, we get pigeonholed as courtesans, and that's what she's doing. She is making a living off of rich men.
Despite the fact that she's passing for European.
Turns out that it happens to be the man who is on the board of directors of the hospital and is the husband of that awful matron.
Right. Gives a summary of her life to date since her husband died, was killed by the communists, as she said. That's when she decided to shut off her emotions and concentrate on her work.
We get that little line about him being killed by the communists, and I started to worry this was going to be really Cold War-y.
Well, especially since it's the 1950s.
Yeah, 1955. It really soft pedals the Cold War, or really takes pains to criticize it, which is quite interesting.
Well, by the ending, although she expresses ambivalence about communism based on her experiences of treating the refugees in Hong Kong, including children, the ending I wasn't surprised to find out that the author was a communist of the novel, because the ending almost sets up, overtly she rejects communism, but in such a way that, like in her discussion with the communist doctor, but in such a way that you understand that she has very, very deep sympathies for it, maybe without even realizing it. And the ending, this is not what happened to the author, but the ending sets it up so that you almost think the character could decide to go to China.
Well, she could.
To the new China.
I'm pretty sure that the way the ending is set up is that we are supposed to understand that Suzanne is going to force the chairman of the hospital to give Jennifer Jones her job back.
Sure.
Because he is compromised and he can't keep on with his censorious activities. And that's a great, that friendship between those two women becomes really important, and it's kind of subtly intertwined in that.
Well, because this is her only protection against the prejudice which the communist doctor thinks is based on her being Eurasian.
Well,
her
I think it's true, yeah.
Which she rejects, but I think we believe him. He is taken seriously.
One of the greatest things about this movie, I can't think of any other movie made in Hollywood during the 1950s where you have such a sympathetic portrayal of a communist character. The doctor is 100% a communist. He's going back to communist China to work as a doctor in the new China, and she never doubts his sincerity or commitment to his ideals. In almost any other movie of this time, you don't get an earnest socialist. You get someone who is dissembling or sneaky or whatever, who doesn't really believe what they're saying anyway, because what they decided to do in popular culture, I don't know if it was decided or it just worked out so nicely and people brainwashed themselves into thinking about this. You get all the rhetoric about totalitarianism, and from the 50s onwards, you pretty much get communists portrayed as Nazis. They already had a great way to portray evil in movies, and they just start, instead of a swastika, they've got a hammer and sickle, and that's it. They don't sound any different. But this guy actually is a communist who sounds like a communist. He's concerned with the plight of the people who've been suffering under centuries of oppression in China. And the backdrop of the whole film is there is this rush of immigration in Hong Kong as people pour over the borders to escape the ravages of the Civil War more than anything, because there is no communist government yet, like fully established. So maybe they're running away from communism, or maybe they're just running away from civil war, which any person would run away from. Now, a lot of these refugees probably are landholders, right? They're from like the class of people that Jennifer Jones' character comes from, who would be in some danger in a communist state. So you understand the movie has sympathy for those people, and I guess anyone would. You don't have to take their point of view on the overall macro political situation to understand that they would want to leave. And there's people just like anybody else and need help.
Now, Han Suyin, this was her own family, the kind of family she came from that she's portraying, landowners.
Who would? They have nothing to gain from a communist takeover, obviously. They are rich.
Interestingly, after having this affair with this war correspondent who died, in 1952, she moved to Malaya and married Leon Comer, an official in the police service. So she keeps marrying these guys, the nationalist, very odd choices, romantic choices for a communist, or a communist sympathizer, because she didn't actually go back to China.
Right.
She didn't want to put herself through it, I guess. That appears to be correct, that this discussion that she has with the communist, she's very sympathetic to the ideas, but she is not willing to sacrifice everything.
Right.
She wants to live a life of love and pleasure, not go and join the Cultural Revolution, and what do you say, you would get your own hospital, but you'd have to be tirelessly devoting yourself to nothing but the cause, always.
Right.
Is how he puts it. As a young, rich woman, she did notice the horrifying suffering around her in China of people in poverty, and that is what inspired her to become a doctor.
Right.
Despite marrying this British officer, she continued to write novels that were criticizing British colonialism.
Good. I hope so.
I guess she got an insider's view there.
Well, we don't know what this guy was like. Maybe he was some kind of reformer or something. Who knows?
He was like the guy in The Souvenir. He was working...
I don't know.
Maybe he was a heroin addict too. No, but that's not what I meant. He was working for the government, but did not approve of their policies. Who knows?
That doesn't get into the film. That all is part of her life after the William Holden character.
So, at a certain point, I realized, just from the extraordinarily idealized way in which this relationship was being portrayed, that this guy was definitely going to die.
Yeah, of course. There are a lot of cues. The movie wants you to know that, I think.
I think so. It's almost like retrospective in advance.
She says in Macau, she says, I want to go to a fortune teller and hear his beautiful lies, and they are told that they're going to live 87 years and have all these kids.
That was a pretty cute trick with the Beatles. Because you could feel this doom hanging over them, I was really watching those Beatles anxiously.
Yeah.
I really wanted the Beatles to go into the box together.
And they did, but it's all a lie, a beautiful lie.
Yeah.
And she says, thank you for your blessed Beatles. That's one of my favorite Jennifer Jones moments. Their final leave-taking at the tree, at that point, you have to know he's going to get killed. Yeah. Because you know they're never going to see each other again.
There's this kind of amazing moment, too, where they talk about reincarnation.
Yeah.
And he says, in the next life, we'll come back and I'll be a woman and you'll be a man.
And she says, you've made me feel touch with my feminine nature.
She says she's become reconciled to being a woman because of him.
Yeah. Again, very strong language for the 50s. That is tantamount to saying that she is just one giant clitoris.
Okay. I didn't read it that way, but okay. But importantly, he says to her family when they visit and talk about the marriage that he has no desire for her to stop working as a doctor.
Yeah. Everything's very progressive about this film.
Oh, but also, importantly, there's this important subplot of her adopting this refugee girl.
Yeah.
Who she's been talking to. And we do learn that she is, although she is a very serious intellectual, not sexually liberated, but, although I guess she becomes that way, but very independent and strong independent woman.
Also, yeah, believes very strongly in the importance of emotions in treating patients. She's not
she's notable for that, and it appears to be working very well.
Yeah. She develops quite a rapport, at least with this one girl, and presumably with many others as well.
Yeah. But this one she adopts.
Yeah, this one.
Because people are talking about, I don't know, just someone says to her something like, why even bother treating these children?
Her parents are dead and no one's going to take her in. Well.
And what was this about selling their son? That couple
that's a
at the
different, And this is, again, these are people that are from her own class. They're refugees from China. They say that, they're very well born from China, but they had to run away during the Civil War. Their son was going to die, and Jennifer Jones saves him, but now there's more sickness in the family, and if they have to, they will sell their son because he is a good stock. He'll bring a good price in.
Well, who are they selling him to?
I don't really know.
Like a Dickens situation, they would sell them to somebody who would, work him to death or something.
I have no idea how grounded in reality that is, but anyway.
It seems like just about everything brought up here is grounded in reality, but we don't know the context of that.
No, we don't. But Jennifer Jones says, don't worry about that. We're not going to make you sell your son to pay for your medical treatment. We're just going to do it for free.
Yeah, I don't know. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about? They develop this amazing relationship with all sorts of philosophical conversations that transforms the way that she experiences the world.
I mean, there are things that really worked on me that I don't know if they would work on everyone. When they're flying home and he is making his plan to go see his wife, she notices that he bites his fingernails, and she says, when you stop biting your fingernails, I'll know that we're completely together and as one. And he sends her a telegram saying he stopped his fingernails, and when she reads it, the telegram to her friend so rapturously, it is unexpectedly great scene for her.
It's another great Jennifer Jones moment.
It is.
Also, the actual receiving the news of his death didn't surprise me or move me that much, but the scene afterwards where she has a vision of him on the top of the hill, that did get to me.
This is a high romantic mid-50s melodrama.
And the music just pouring through these scenes, the theme song over and over, sometimes with lyrics, sometimes not, sometimes diegetic, sometimes extra diegetic.
Yeah, and my sense is that was a huge hit, that song, a popular song of the mid-50s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like many of these movies, they were keyed into, it was like a multimedia marketing onslaught. You would have the song playing on the hit parade, and then the movie would come out, and of course everyone would go see it because they loved the song, and it would just mutually reinforce.
So the book was just called A Many-Splendored Thing, but I assume that is referring to love, so.
Well, they wanted to make it a little more clear.
Just so you know what you're getting.
This is a love story,
when you go to this
folks.
Movie. If the imagery of Jennifer Jones and William holding in their swimsuits wasn't enough, passionately embracing.
Yeah, this is the same year as Picnic, I believe, so he was without clothes a lot in promotional materials.
I find, like I said, both of these actors, or did I say it? Both of these actors are kind of long in the tooth. They are helped by the fact that they're not getting any close-ups, but she at least is much older than, this is not a young intern.
I don't know, man. She looks fucking incredible in this movie, so I don't think she's got anything to apologize for.
I don't think so either, but I was thinking more of my reaction to poor William Holden in Picnic, where he seems like a very long-in-the-tooth love object for everybody in that small town to become hysterical over.
I guess.
I really complained when we watched it recently. I was just just like, couldn't they have found somebody a little bit younger to take their shirt off all the time?
Well, everybody says that, but I don't know. I mean, I think he looks fine in that movie.
He looks fine, but he looks old.
He's in his mid-30s. So he's way younger than us.
Yeah, well, we're not taking our shirts off in movies.
Or William Holden.
I don't know, that movie's ridiculous. The best thing in it is Kim Novak giving the only non-hysterical performance.
Yeah, she's great.
Anything else you want to say about Love is a Many-Splended Thing before we do our movie-going section?
Loved it.
It was great.
Looking forward to seeing more Jennifer Jones Fox films.
So there is we're getting quite far into the filmography now, and we still haven't found a bad film.
I think we've only got 6 movies left. We'll see if we ever get to one. We may have a 100% success rate.
May, but I'm a little anxious every time we do. I mean, it's setting me up well to enjoy the films because I get more anxious with every episode we do that this time we're going to find a dud.
Right. Well, we'll see. If you've been watching along, I'd love to hear if you agree. Our This Week in Cinema going is going to be fairly short this week because we did see 2 films, Bend of the River and I Was at Home, but, however, each of them is going to be covered in upcoming episodes devoted to retrospectives for the winter season. So Bend of the River is Jimmy Stewart. We'll be doing that one in April. And I Was at Home, but is the final or most recent film by Angelis Chanelec. And that one we're going to be covering in March. So come back for that. And next week, come back for the next episode of There's Sometimes a Buggy, in which we'll be going back to Hollywood studios year by year. This time RKO 1931. We're going to be discussing Lonely Wives and Kept Husbands.
Oh Lord, what made us decide to choose those?
I think that they had a nice husband and wife feel to them. I haven't seen either of these, so it's going to be very interesting. I'm not going to vouch for them.
And these aren't directors we know or anything?
Lonely Wives directed by Russell Mack. Don't know anything about him. Kept Husbands directed by Lloyd Bacon, who I do know. I like him a lot. He directed mostly for Warner Brothers, but this one's RKO, so...
Join us for some, I don't know what, sex comedies? We're not sure. We'll find out.
Matrimonial fun. Well, the last time we did RKO, we also discussed movies we had never seen, and we had a really good time with those,
That
right?
is true, yeah.
So, let's hope it's 2 for 2.
Will they maintain their position of the feminist studio? We'll find out.
I think there's going to be ample opportunity to judge them based on the subject matter that the titles promise. See you soon.